Welcome back, guys, to the podcast. This week, we have a really interesting topic at hand, and we are going to talk about, for the first time, ethical considerations in the sync licensing business. Yes, there are ethics, and yes, there are potentially some situations and some boundaries you might want to set for yourself inside of this industry because, like it or not, the industry that we are serving with our music is full of advertising, TV shows, reality shows, movies, trailers. And while there's a lot of great content that's inspirational and hopeful, and actually, there are products and services out there that really help people and make their lives better, it's a tool, right? Just like with everything, with fire, there are ways that you can cook your meals with fire, but you could also burn down your neighbor's house. So the tool itself is neutral, but how you use it can be used for good or bad. Same thing with TV shows, commercials, products, movies, trailers, right? There are really great TV programs that I think have really done great things for humanity. There's also been some that I don't think have done great things for humanity, and maybe even done harmful things in terms of putting negative ideas or normalizing terrible behavior or desensitizing us to certain behaviors. So we need to just be honest about that. And that line for each one of us is going to be different. So what I think is acceptable is going to be different from what you think is acceptable. And that's okay. So as we talk about these ethical concerns about getting into the business, I want to make sure you guys keep that in the back of your mind, that we're not telling you what you should or shouldn't put your music towards. That's really up to you. You are the king or queen of your own domain. You get to decide where you want to put your creative energy and how much you want to put your music out there to potentially be used by maybe some TV shows or commercials that you just fundamentally disagree with. And we're going to talk to you about how much of that can you control in this industry and how much you can't control in this industry. And there's certainly a lot of it you cannot control. So I also want to make sure that some of you, if you're going to have big ethical problems, this might be a good wake-up call to this might not be the industry for you, or at least be aware of some of the big ethical concerns you could find yourself in down the road. Again, wish somebody had this chat with me 12 years ago because I don't think I knew what I was really getting into until all these years later. And even though I'm extremely thankful for my career and everything that I've learned, and I'm really thankful for the sync licensing business, these are just some things that I think you need to air it out. You need to just expose this kind of stuff, put it out there so that everybody can be aware of what they're really getting involved with. So first thing I want to talk about, and I have Mike and Trevor with me today, is how much control does a composer have when they're partnering with a music library, in terms of if they decide, let's say you're watching this podcast, you're going to go with a library, and there's certain TV shows that you just know you don't like, whatever they may be. There's some shows that you think are great and are really cool. So how much control do you have over what TV shows your music gets placed in when you're partnered with a music library? Okay, we're not talking about you submitting directly to, let's say, a music supervisor or a showrunner or somebody that's directly involved with the show, but going through a music library that has access to multiple clients and multiple people making different types of content. How much control do you really have in those situations? And luckily, we have two library owners here that can talk to us about it. So Trevor, why don't you go ahead and get us started on your experience, because you've been both a composer for a library and now you've actually been a library owner. What control or options does a composer have working with a library in terms of what content they can get out there and what they can choose?
Yeah, so your best bet would be to kind of research what the library, like what kind of clients the library has, because you're not going to be able to put stipulations on your own, like on your tracks, once it's in that library. Now, you can beforehand ask, like, hey, do you guys work with any kind of, insert, problematic companies or TV shows or whatever it is, right? Like we use porn as an example. That's an obvious one where a lot of people don't want their music in porn. And nowadays that's actually separated. But in the past, I remember when I first started, people were getting like softcore porn placements because they were still going to, I don't know if they are now, but they were going to libraries and getting music because they were like film productions, but they were still, And so I remember people that I knew kind of being like, oh, they'll see on their BMI sheet some movie and they'll be like, what's the movie? And they'll look it up and be like, oh. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for people of like, well, we didn't know that was going to happen. And most of them didn't care at the time, but if they did, then there'd be a problem, right? And so, but now from my experience, like the porn music has kind of separated from the library world. So you don't have that much of a problem. There might still be some overlap in places. I know a guy who just did a bunch of music for a major porn network where they just wanted a bunch of hip hop beats and they paid him X amount up front. And then that was it. And he was cool with that. And that was outside of library stuff because I think that there's just a separation there. more than likely enough people made a big stink about it in the past, like the composers and stuff. And so they just kind of were like, yeah, we'll just separate it. So that more than likely isn't going to be an issue, but still, if it is something that's on your mind, I would ask the library. I don't think they would really be worried too much. Now, what does get kind of a little bit dangerous is, so a personal example is I've had music in the past in both MSNBC, CNN, Fox, like all the news networks. Now, during these times, everybody's pretty polarized about their favorite news networks and all that kind of stuff. And so people start to get that kind of that feeling of like, I don't want my music on X network that I don't like, right? Well, that's really problematic for a company who's just trying to have their music, which is a library, as a service, right? And they go, okay, if they have to now fraction off the music in their library, depending on like where they think the music should go, it makes business impossible at that point, because then it's like, well, these tracks by this guy can't go here, and here, but it can go here, and here. And these tracks by this guy, and that's an impossible task for a library to do. So library essentially has to be like, for the most part, is a all or nothing kind of situation in most scenarios, outside of extreme stuff, whether it's like one-off stuff like documentaries that people may not agree with and stuff. Those usually get kind of considered like if a company, like if the library owner, and the library owner is lines up with you somehow, or at least in some way, and you are comfortable with the fact that they won't do like some crazy documentary that you're just like, well, that's out there for me or whatever, and then cool. But like, just kind of try and understand that, because for the most part, these libraries, like, they need to be able to just make the deal, because at the end of the day, like, licensing music is a product, and whether it's with one or two or three different companies, they're all different. They all have different things, whether it's the news networks, the documentaries, or even if it's like reality shows that people might not agree with. Maybe that a lot of people didn't like Jersey Shore, but Jersey Shore used a lot of music. A lot of people don't like the Kardashians, well, they use a lot of music, and so if you're really uncomfortable and you really want to fraction off that much, where you whole genres bother you, like you like some reality but not others, it's really, you're going to be hard pressed to find a library that's going to be able to do that for you, because most libraries just see genres as all of it, all reality, all news, all this. And if you're not cool with that, then you're going to have to like make a decision. So,
absolutely. And Mike, do you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I think like really what it comes down to is what really determines that is, whoever owns and has the exclusivity over the publishing, really. So when it comes down to the contract, you're signing with an exclusive library, they're going to grab the publishing. That gives them the right to push it and exploit however they feel, So now you might have a chance to have some control if, let's say, you sign with a library that does like a 50-50 split, but normally those kinds of libraries will have a clause in there saying like, hey, we get first refusal or whatever the case is, on any project. So really, if you're, I personally don't think that there's any control that you have. Once you put your music in a library, it's going to go wherever it's going to go pretty much, and you don't have really a say in that. I think the best thing that you can do is, before you actually sign that deal, is just talk to them, do your research, see like what it is that they do, so for instance, like, I come more from advertising, right? So let's say, there's a lot of people that aren't really supporters of companies like Walmart or even like, Nike, with what they're doing with factories around the world and all that kind of stuff. And, and if that's a big problem for you, then, but you're sending music to a library that consistently services those, that has music on those commercials, that's probably not the right fit. And there's no way for you to be like, oh, okay, yeah, you know what, all these like car commercials I'm down with, but like, just don't put my stuff in a Nike commercial, like that's just like, that's just too much of, that means you got to keep a note of it. They got to tell their staff and be like, oh, you know what, when we're doing a search, you can't pull anything from this, from this person's stuff. So that's just too much. And, I think just contractually, yeah, you're like, once you sign that contract for exclusivity or whatever, that company who has that kind of ownership has, they basically can do whatever it is that they want with the music.
Yeah. And I also want to make sure that we're clear too, that what we're talking about here is when you guys put together like full tracks for full albums for a library, and that's basically for their catalog to shop to their clients. So now that's going to be a little different than, let's say, custom work, or there's basically, let's say, a Nike commercial or a Ford commercial or a promo or maybe even a TV show that's going to the library saying, hey, we need some custom original music created specifically for this campaign. So now we can talk a little bit more about that situation. So I want to make sure that everybody's listening, that's watching, that knows that there's two environments, or there's two business situations. One, you sign that contract, that usually an exclusive agreement with a library, and it basically says that they have the right to exploit your music in any way they possibly can. That's why, obviously, do your research with them. Make sure you don't have any big ethical problems with the kind of clients that they've been serving in the past. And most of the time on their website, you can see who they've served. And just make sure that you are 100% comfortable on the types of projects that they do pitch for. And as long as you have that conversation, then you'd feel more comfortable that, like, hey, I don't care where you guys put my music. I like the clients you're working with. I'm on board with all that. And that's really cool. But then there's this other side, which would be, let's say, the same library, all in the same library. They're going to come to you as a composer and say, we need some original music that you've never created before. And it's for specifically Nike or AccuView or whatever, Tylenol. It doesn't matter who it is. It's for a specific client. So those are the situations where you actually have a lot more control over it. But maybe we can talk about some of the pros and cons about why, or what your choices are. Obviously, just saying yes or no to any individual custom work opportunity, and what that can do for you in the future. So, Trevor, maybe you can talk about some experiences you've had.
Yeah, I think actually you're missing one too. I think there's a third, which is sync agents, which has a whole nother scenario, which I'd like to talk about a little bit after this one. So, with custom stuff, for the most part, from my experience anyway, custom stuff is very, like, unless you're kind of on the payroll of a library or whoever's bringing you the custom work, if you've got a reason why you can't do the custom project, usually they're not too worried about it. Like, they're not gonna get mad at you unless you're constantly declining stuff, and then maybe they're like, okay, you're just not really reliable. But if it's, every once in a while, it's like, I can't, I'm too busy, or I don't like Nike, or, whatever your reason is, I don't see it as much of a problem, except for the fact that if you're basically not able to compete for whatever the money is, right? That's where it hurts you. But at the same time, if it's an internal reason, if it's something that kind of you feel would hurt your soul or your, whatever, you, and that's, you're making the decision that's more important than the money, right? Which is great. I think that's in long term, it's probably better, right? You don't have that on your conscience all the time and stuff. So custom stuff, I don't see it as dangerous, because most of the time, in my experience anyway, you do get that, like, freedom to be like, I can't this time around or whatever. And they're not, because unless, like I said, unless you're on some sort of payroll, or, they're you've signed something kind of claiming that you're going to be there every time, it shouldn't be that big of an issue, unless it's like almost every project you're like declining for one reason or another.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to add to that there are certainly been times in my career where I can't do the custom gigs. And it hasn't been, I can't think of one that was an ethical concern, but it was just either time, or I had other things that were pressing, or I had other licensing gigs that are also coming up. And Trevor's absolutely right. Like, you don't need to expect perfection in terms of you have to always submit for every single opportunity. Obviously, though, the more you do and the more available you are, the more you become more of that inner circle person that they will always come to and get reliable submissions from. So, but just be aware of that if you consistently, either flake out or decline or that kind of thing, they might start to kind of push you a little further out of the inner circle, because they're like, well, this producer, for whatever reason, if it's ethical, if they're just too busy, they're not really ready to work. And so just be aware of that you can afford that from time to time. It's kind of like having a day job. Like, you can take a sick day from time to time, but if it's like every Friday, you're always sick, you're always late, your bosses, or every Monday, I should say, every boss will start to realize that, and you're going to pay consequences. You're going to get, shorter hours. They're going to maybe fire you. So just know that if it becomes a pattern, people start to notice that stuff. But how about you, Mike?
Yeah. So when it comes to custom stuff, you have a lot more control. As a composer, generally speaking, you're a freelancer, so you're a contract worker. So you have the ability to say no for whatever. You don't even have to give a reason, to pass up jobs. But yeah, like Trevor said, if you pass up too many, then you might just you might just stop getting those emails, in your inbox, about those opportunities. Now, I will say though, there are some instances, let's say, like, I think this happens more in trailers, some advertising, and also some sort of custom work for shows or whatever too, where you might not actually know what the end product is, and this is really big, I think, in trailers because there's so much like confidentiality, so a custom gig for a trailer, you probably are going to know like what the title is to be able to write for it, but sometimes you can just get a brief where it's like, hey, we're working on a movie that just needs this and this and this, right? So the trouble is, okay, sounds cool, the brief sounds cool, and then let's say you do it and then you find out later, oh wait, it's for this movie, and you end up finding out that it's an adaptation of like some book written by some racist author or something like that, and you're like, whoa, hold on, but usually if it's like an extreme case like that, and if the library or the company didn't know, like, was in the dark just as much as you were, a lot of times, I think most of the time, I think companies are willing to try to figure out a way to make things work. Generally speaking, there's enough people pitching to where it's kind of like, okay, that's fine. If you want to drop out of this, just, we didn't know either kind of thing. It's cool. You can drop your track out of it. Unless if your track is like so phenomenal and they think that like it's going to knock it out of the park kind of thing. But that's very rare,
Yeah.
And then like, I guess, yeah, the other thing too is just like, yeah, it's, I think that the trouble is like when you don't know what exactly you're pitching for beforehand, because there are instances where you can't actually know that. And you have to just kind of make a judgment call as to what that is. And again, that just comes from relationships, that's knowing the company that you're working with. And, knowing the kind of people, like, the longer that you work with the particular company, you'll get to know some of the people that you're working with and stuff like that. You'll get to know like a little bit of where they stand on certain things, and if that aligns with you, that's all part of doing your research and all just kind of working and all that kind of stuff too. But I mean, yeah, like really at the end of the day, if you're contracted, you have that kind of choice. You're a freelancer, you're not hired for that job yet until you actually do something. They put you on the contract for that particular job. And obviously if you're, there are music houses out there that have composers on staff. If you're on staff, that's your job, is to write for everything that comes in. So,
Yep. And I do want to say, so like, obviously, as we've been telling you guys, big thing is obviously do your research, know who you're partnering with, know who their clients are. If you happen to get a placement on, let's say, as Trevor was saying, like a news network that you disagree with, or a type of content that you're really not cool with, you didn't want it to be out there, but there it is, you got a royalty, your music's on it. One thing you can do is you can take that money, if you have this conscience of like, I don't like making money off of that or this, I don't want to serve this or that. Take that royalty or that sync fee or whatever you got and put it towards a charity that goes for the other side of whatever you got your content, right? So if it was like a news network that you really don't like, donate that money to another news network or donate it to some other opposite cause, right? Or if it's some sort of an ethical thing on a TV show that was showing a lot of bad self-destructive behavior and you're like, I don't like that that's encouraging people with that behavior, go help send that to like an addictive recovery program or donate it to a charity or something like that. So there are solutions. You don't have to be just stuck going like, oh my gosh, I sold my soul and my music is out there. It's that kind of thing. So there are things you can do. And I've done that in my career for the things that I have not been happy that my music got out there. And maybe it's a coping justification way to do it, but there's definitely something to that where you're like, at least the money that I did get from this kind of corrupt thing that I'm not really happy with, I took that and put it to good use. I took money out of this corrupt thing and put it to something that might help people. So just a suggestion, you guys can decide where you want to do those kind of things, what's appropriate. But Trevor, I do want to talk quickly about sync agents. As far as I understand, I'm glad you brought that up, because with sync agents, that what I understand about their relationships with their represented artists is that they will actually go to the represented artist when there's an opportunity for them, for the artist to actually sign off on yes or no. Is that what you understand as well?
Yeah, for the most part. So depending on the terms with the sync agent, the seeking, like the reason why an artist, because this isn't necessarily something for like producers and stuff, and library writers and stuff like that. This is more for artists, and so they have to consider their image a lot more, not just personally, but just in general of the like what the artist image is. And so there should be, anyway, in my opinion, a relationship between the sync agent and the artist of, are we helping your image? And in that case, then, there's a lot of control of actually like, maybe like if for some reason, let's just use a weird example, but if for some reason it's a rap artist and some like child program wants to use a piece of the rap song, and the artist is like, well, I don't want my image to really be like reaching towards kids, so let's not do that. Like the agent, more than likely the agent will already know that, but just the conversation will more than likely happen anyway. Because there's multiple things. There's personal, there's all that kind of stuff. And since that's kind of the sync agent's job, that relationship I think is really great in that sense of like, I mean, I've, my company is dipping into the sync agency part. And this has been a question when talking to artists is like, well, do you work with, insert something they don't agree with, like meat eating documentaries instead of veganism, or, whatever the thing might be. And then it's like the answer in that situation is an easy, well, we don't have to if you don't want to. But if it's the library scenario, it's a little bit different. So I wanted to kind of throw that in there because the sync agency thing, I think, is a cool relationship for artists who are doing the artist thing to be able to have that control in their, in their space.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that a little bit too. I think that, there are, again, there's a lot more control like when working with sync agents, but I think at the end of the day, it all really comes back down to the contract, right? So I think the reason why we have contracts is to eliminate any kind of gray area anywhere, So really, if it's not in the contract, you can put it in the contract and be like, hey, listen, I need to have whatever first refusal or whatever, and that's something that can be a point that's negotiated with. And it's easier to negotiate those, like Trevor was saying, because of brand image and all that kind of stuff with sync agents than necessarily, as a composer or producer to a library or music house. So.
Yeah, totally. And I'm glad you guys clarified all that. And it's pros and cons, right? So like you work with a sync agent, you get a lot more control over where your music gets at. But I don't believe you're going to be getting the number of placements or opportunities that you would get with a library, because a library is just like a la carte. Whatever their clients need, they can just go grab it. So it's like, just like everything in life, there's no clear 100%. This is the obvious answer. It just depends on where your priorities are. And obviously for me, and I know Trevor and Mike, we haven't really been sort of public facing producers or artists. So for us, we're not really worried about like, what about my image? Because for the most part in this industry, if you guys are not aware, we don't get any credit. Like you don't ever see our names. Like nobody knows for the most part who these strange people are that are making this music in the background. And most of you guys probably watching this before you found my channel and what we were talking about probably assumed that those were from, I don't know, major label artists or for some just super connected composers. Most people don't even realize that. Everybody that I meet in person and tell them like, yeah, I do the sync licensing thing. They're like, oh, I didn't even know that like that music came from people that were just out of their home studios. It's just this assumption that we all think this music comes from, I don't know, the ether. I don't know where people actually assume it, but it's all coming from, just people, just regular Joes like me and Trevor and Mike. It's where it's really coming from. So we don't really care so much about like, all right, my music was on this show, that show, that show. You never saw my name on it. You never know if you weren't me, you wouldn't have known that my track was actually out there. And unless I went and publicly put it on my social media and told everybody, right? So you have some flexibility there. Like if your track gets into a TV show you're not happy about, just don't tell anybody. And nobody really has to know about it. It doesn't really have to, affect you. And if you really have an ethical problem with it, like I said, maybe take that money and put it to a really good use and help somebody out in need, right? So anyways, moving on from that, let's talk about when you're being asked to create music, mostly I would say with lyrical themes. I don't know, instrumental, I don't even know if I can think of a time when this would even come into place, but mostly when you have vocals on your track. And this has happened in my career, and I know Mike and Trevor have had it as well, where a client will say, we want a song with lyrics that talk about X or Y or Z, and they want specific themes to talk about a certain type of thing to fit, let's say, a certain show or a certain sort of segment inside of a show or a commercial. So what are some of these themes? Well, some of them, they can be just as innocent as, just falling in love and just, finding your perfect mate or something like that. It could be heartbreak. It could be disaster. But there could be things that include hooking up with somebody, on a first night and on a one night stand, or, drug use, alcohol use, reckless behavior, you name it, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that, again, I'm not going to tell you guys where you should draw that line. You decide it for yourself, but you will be probably asked to create some music that might start to edge up against your ethical line in terms of, do I want my creative energy to go out into the world in this format, to talk about these themes, to encourage this kind of whatever I think is unethical behavior, right? So we can maybe talk about some of those, and maybe Trevor, you can start with maybe some of your experiences, maybe some gigs you've had that you've actually noticed that was something that like, whoa, am I ready or willing to play that out, or even some of your clients now with your library?
Yeah. I mean, oh, man, like a year and a half ago, we were tasked to do a sexually explicit album, which narrowed down who was going to work on it to like a smaller group of people, and that was totally fine. Like, because there were certain people who either were like, well, I don't want to write those kinds of lyrics, or people who made tracks who were like, well, I don't want those types of lyrics on my tracks, and that is one of those scenarios that even the client understood. And I remember telling him like, this will take a little bit longer because we need to get a few extra people who usually don't work on this kind of stuff, because our team, the amount of people that would work on it was a lot smaller. And for, I mean, yeah, this is just like the custom type thing, or any kind of scenario where you're asked to do, some like write, especially with words, write something that you don't agree with. I mean, a lot of times you could even like, as I've been in scenarios where a client will ask for something specific that like we'll use, sexuality as it's an easier extreme or whatever. Well, an artist was like, well, I'll do it, but I will only do innuendos. And it actually was like better because the song was left up to interpretation. And then it like actually works in like different scenes at different moments because it could mean multiple things, right? That's actually in a scenario where they're like, they didn't want to be super direct with the wording, but since there was innuendo, it allowed them to kind of feel a little more comfortable being like, well, this song is about a lot of things. And then the interpretation of the listener is on them. And like there's different ways of kind of navigating the like lyrical part. But yeah, if it's like super straightforward of like what you don't like or what you don't agree with or whatever, like I said before, it just like be honest with yourself and the person who, the client or whatever, and just be like, yeah, I can't do that this time. I don't think it should be much of a problem, like I said, unless it's constantly a problem.
Absolutely. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, it's again, I think this falls in line with custom stuff. I think as a composer, artist, or producer, or whatever, you have the ability to control like whether you want to get on that job or not. I will say though, again, coming from advertising, so I haven't seen as much issues, let's say, with the themes, but more so with like a process. So for instance, in advertising, you'll get a lot of times where the ad agency or a producer at the ad agency will write a song and be like, it'll be like a rap song or something like that. And this is what we want to do. And here are the lyrics, right? And then you get it and you read it and you're like looking it over and you're like, this is insulting, dude. Like, can we, so you might have the opportunity, or you're as the composer or producer, you might have the opportunity to go back to obviously go to your music house first and be like, do I have to stick to these lyrics, or can I make this like, what I mean, because this is what I think of it. I think it's like kind of especially if it is in a genre that obviously the ad agency doesn't really know, and they're, but especially, and a lot of times it's all driven by ego, like some dude at the agency just wants to, be like, yeah, I can write music, and they just do it. And, and again, like for example, I don't want to, whatever genre it is, but like, let's say it's insulting to the community, to the people that, and to everything like that, as an artist and as a music creator and as a music expert that you're supposed to be, all the way from the house down to the producer. Yeah, you can kind of push back a little bit. As a producer, you go to your music house first and be like, hey, what's going on with this? Do we have leeway to switch this around to make this more appropriate? What's the deal? Usually that can be finessed a bit to where it's like, hey, the house can just kind of be like, hey, look, can you let us do our thing and we'll make this really great, and we'll keep it to what your style is. But there are definitely instances where it's like, no, stick to the script. This is a script. It's not lyrics. Like, this is a script. This is how it has to be, kind of thing. And sometimes it's like, again, most of the time it's ego. Sometimes it's also just like, well, you kind of have to stick to the script too, because we already shot it, and they're already saying these words. So, but I think that's more of what I've kind of run into, where you're getting into situations like that. So, if it's a problem for you as a producer or an artist, whatever, you have that opportunity just to say no and be like, no, I can't do that. If you can get, again, it all comes back down to being able to get that information. So.
Yeah, you reminded me of a gig I used to have. It was the American Career College where I got hired to do basically write the lyrics and find a vocalist to sing the song. And they literally specifically gave me like specific phrases I have to use as lyrics. So it's exactly what you said. I could craft it, I could make the melody, but they were like, you have to, and I don't know if I can remember all of them specifically, but it was like, you can get a degree in as little as 9 months. Like that was like a phrase. And I had to have that as a lyric inside of the song. And so I remember seeing that, definitely feeling constrained in a way, going like, what rhymes with months then, right? Because I have to have that second line. So it was a fun exercise though. And I think sometimes when you limit your choices, it actually forces a lot more interesting creativity out of you. But I do remember looking at all those and going like, all right, are any of these sort of things that I don't want to say or that I don't agree with? And every single one of them, I was like, it seems like they're just telling you what their program is, what the benefits are, what you can get out of it, and sort of getting yourself. And the idea was it was sort of a trade school to, become a nurse or a practitioner of some sort. So as I was going through all that, I was just like, okay, this is a challenge. I'm really interested by the challenge. And then each one of these lines, I didn't really have an ethical problem with them because I didn't feel like they were lying. I didn't feel like they were over-promising or overselling or anything like that. They were just really talking about like, this is a program that will, if you're kind of feeling stuck in your life, you're not going anywhere, you kind of just sort of like an hourly wage job, you want to start to build more of a career, this is a way where within a couple of months, you can actually have a skill that can actually make you marketable and useful for, the health industry or whatever. So, and all of that, I remember having a little bit of this inner chatter within me to go like, okay, do I agree with this? Is this cool? Is this not cool? But also just being really excited about that challenge of like having to use their lines and insert them into the lyrics that I was doing. So yeah, I think you're right. There is a sort of, I actually will say that in my career, I don't think I've ever come across anybody that was like pushing me to do something I didn't want to do, or even trying to force me. I've always had I think every library owner I've ever worked with have been totally just like, even when we've gotten to situations, and I can't think of them right now, but if we've gotten to situations where there might be an ethical concern, they've always been more than willing to be like, hey, and if you're, just like Trevor said, if you're uncomfortable with this, no hard feelings at all. This might not be for all of you. So I have found that actually there's been a really good like ethical core in a lot of the sync licensing business, at least on the library side of things. Now I can't speak for every library, I'm sure not all of them are the same, but just in my experience, I've actually felt this sort of like, I've really felt in control of a lot of that kind of stuff. And I haven't been feeling like, hey buddy, you're either like on our team or you're against us kind of a thing. I haven't had any of that in my career. So that's good news, I think.
I mean, at the end of the day, sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say at the end of the day, like, this, Trevor, it's like we're problem solvers, so it's not really in the best interest of a library, let's say, to force somebody to do something, because that's just creating another problem rather than solving one. So now if it's a problem that they have to figure out with a client, they got to figure out a way to solve that, and vice versa with with the composers too. So
and when working with libraries, and then also being one, from my view, libraries are essentially need to please everybody. And so there's a lot of things that they just kind of try and gray out. A perfect example is album art covers. For libraries, there was a time when album art was all over the place. There was some super risky album art, and then
I remember. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
Some of the early days, man, how insulting some, it's just
oh yeah.
So I remember. I'm not gonna name names or anything like that. I can name somebody. I used to see it'd be freaking what do you call it? It's it'd be badass hip hop #1 or whatever, and then it's freaking you see the brick wall with a cartoon character of a black dude in a basketball jersey with a gun. I'm like, what the fuck?
No, I remember those, man. There was a lot of them like that. And
guys.
but that the more and more I think people just kind of got involved and conversations went back and forth, things started to gray out and kind of go, okay, we need to be creative and safe. And that's true in the music and the artwork and in the approach of everything. It's why I brought up the innuendo thing, is that a lot of music now, you'll listen to an album that's supposed to be gangster rap, and it's still not super vague, but very up to interpretation of what they really mean, what's going on, partially because people, a lot of people just don't want to listen to super straightforward, in your face stuff. And then also it's hard to place when if it's super specific of like specific guns or specific neighborhoods, or, it starts to get hard to like land. But then if it's more broad of a topic, it's a little easier. It's an easier pill for everybody to swallow too. And so whether it's, the music, the lyrics, the cover art, whatever it is, like in general, I think that the library area, just because of the business that it's in, it's got to play, like if you look at clients and composers and writers and everybody, like that's like every spectrum of everything in the world, like especially TV is the entire point of TV and film, is to play to some sort of audience. So everything that your clients are basically a ton of different types of audiences, and then your composers, it's the same thing. And so the libraries are kind of in the middle of this, like, well, I need to make sure I please everybody, so let's try not to step on too many toes. And so luckily that's a good position for everybody to be in, because you feel a little bit safer going in and like giving your music to somebody whose entire like existence kind of is to not rock the boat too much, because then if you rock the boat too much in this day and age, like you might get canceled. And so it's dangerous. And so you're just kind of like where we are now, where everything is nice, not like clean and boring or anything, but it's safe. If that's the wrong word too, because that sounds bad, but it's something along those lines. So,
but there's there's a positive side of what you're saying there too, which is that like when you don't have the specific explicit lyrics, which I've definitely encouraged people to stay away from, mostly actually for your financial future, actually, believe it or not, because when you have very explicit and specific lyrics about specific situations, then just like what Trevor said, you're only targeting one particular type of a scene, and that might be one TV show out of your whole career. It might be one thing that might have needed that. But like you said, if you use innuendo, you leave it up for a little bit more of an interpretation. You kind of use more general lyrics that can kind of be, they're kind of fun. I think of it more as being fun, and also creative, because what you're doing is you're putting images in people's heads, right? Rather than telling them exactly, here's the scene, here's the emotion, here's the thing, you're kind of leaving it up for, like you said, a couple of interpretations of what this could actually mean. And it sort of triggers people's visual memories of an experience they had or something like that. And so a lot of times those kind of lyrics that can be a little more vague and certainly not explicit with like cuss words and that kind of thing, you're going to just have a lot more opportunities. You're going to get a lot more placements, and you're going to earn a lot more income with them. So we definitely will, I think all three agree on that. Now I want to, before we end up today, I do also want to talk about Christian music, because I've gotten a lot of these either YouTube comments or emails from people who are Christian artists, Christian producers, and they want to know, is there a future for them in the sync licensing market? So I have a strategy for those of you that are Christian artists and producers, but I want to first talk to Trevor and Mike and find out what their experience, if they've had any experience with Christian music, or just any takes they have on that. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and start?
I have not really, in sync licensing, I've not really had experience much with Christian music. As a producer, I've had a bit of experience with gospel music. But one thing that I will say is, and also that actually through that has kind of cross-pollinated into some areas of sync licensing, but for the most part, I've seen that being pretty niche. And even then, it's not like, gospel or Christian music was being used for a Christian show. It was more like, oh, we need, let's say, a gospel tune for this scene in this movie because this is what's happening, So, and the movie was still in itself very secular, So, I haven't had too much experience with that. I would just say that I think that it is. I think that there are certain markets for it that do exist. I just think that it's kind of niche. It's not the mainstream, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get work. And I think when it comes to advertising, again, coming from advertising, I think probably what you're going to see is a lot more regional ad campaigns, stuff like that. So, it's going to be somewhat dependent on, might be dependent on where you live, or if that's something that you want to do, maybe target certain, if there's, certain areas in the country or whatever that, that cater to that more, and those sort of like churches, let's say there's a lot of churches that have a lot of money that do spend on advertising and spend on stuff like that in certain parts of the country, so I would think that in those areas, there's probably music houses that are servicing, providing, services to them, So if you're looking for work, you might want to research that. But again, it's not, I don't think it's not mainstream. So I think it's kind of a niche thing, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Yep. How about you, Trevor?
Similar, except I have a different, like, or not a different, but I have a thought on the future too. So gospel music has kind of been the main thing that still gets licensed a good amount throughout, like, because I mean, whenever you're watching a show or a movie or anything like that, and there's a church, you're not going to hear pop Christian music coming out of that church. You're going to be hearing gospel music, like choirs and stuff like that. Just because of the emotion that it lives, like that, just it signals in a movie or in a show that that's a church. And so the music supervisor, whoever, knows that, and so they just, they want good gospel music, and so there's always like a place, and I think like it's actually kind of hard to find a lot of times. So if you're somebody who does got like good gospel music, church music type stuff, or you have a group of people who can record that kind of stuff, there's actually a pretty good market for you to be able to do that. So for those of you who, maybe a couple singers that want to get together and put together some singing gospel stuff, like I think there's a few libraries that would really love to get some of that. So there's that. Also with the like more contemporary Christian stuff, it's hard, but then I think in the future will be a little bit better, because right now there's this company called Hillsong, which is like the major like Christian record label or something. I don't know exactly how it would describe itself, but essentially they have a ton of music, and they make it very accessible. So if like a music library or not a library, a TV show or movie wants to license it, it's super easy. So and from my understanding, not that expensive. So usually they just go to that for the like contemporary mainstream type stuff. But as we as a society kind of start to fraction off from what we see now, which is like all-encompassing channels and TV and media and stuff, and into more niche things, I think there will be a place for somebody who's got some cool Christian music, contemporary music, to then be like, oh, well, let me go to these potential smaller clients. An example is like, that contemporary Christian music isn't going to work too well on most TV channels. But I'm pretty sure there's going to be Christian-centered online things, whether it's online, TV shows, or like networks that are only online, like a Christian Netflix type of thing. Like all things are going to start popping up, and it won't be NBC, but it'll be these other things that you could get in on the ground floor, or get in when they're, pretty big, and kind of start going down that road. I think that's going to be a really great market for that type of niche, if it doesn't already exist right now. I don't know. There might be a lot of that already. I wouldn't be surprised, but I would say that that's a good place for people who are doing like more contemporary Christian music to like kind of look into and try and get some, do some projects in that world.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's coming up. There was actually a new kind of a Netflix service that I just recently discovered as I was going through all of my, personal development stuff. I think it's called Gaia, GAI something, or I don't know exactly how you pronounce it or spell it, but it's basically like a Netflix, but it's nothing but like, talking about like spiritual matters essentially. And it's like really high quality content. There's alternative medicine in there. There's basically like how to, there's therapeutic stuff on there. There's stuff for how to change your mind, and how to understand like how to get rid of a bad habit. I mean, it's just like a self-help, like just oasis of just all these really cool, interesting thinkers and sort of unorthodox thinkers, like people that are not necessarily being held up as the experts of our society, but they have these different theories and different ways to go about it. Doesn't mean that they're all going to be right, but I'm like, this is so cool that there's a whole world right here. I didn't know this existed, that I could get lost over here, right? And so you're absolutely right. There's going to be a Christian one. There's going to be all these different subcultures that develop their own streaming services. So what I do say to a lot of Christian artists and producers that come to me with that question is I say, go turn on TV, let me know how many Christian programs you're seeing on there. You have CBN, there's probably a couple maybe, but there's really not much going on in the Christian broadcasting world, right? There's just not many TV shows, not many movies, that kind of thing. So it's just like Mike said, it is niche. There's a small area there, and you might have to do a lot of digging to find out how do those TV shows get their music and try to get into those channels. But the other solution I have for you, if you are a Christian artist and you do want to put your music out there, is you will probably have to eliminate words that are specifically targeting Christians, right? So talking about God, Jesus, any sort of biblical references, anything that's specific to Christianity, you will probably have to take those out of your lyrics. But you could still keep your themes the same. So you can be talking about, and I know there's a lot of Christian music where they're talking about their love of God or of Jesus or anything like that. They're just not saying the name, but they're including the energy, right? The story is still the same, but they're just not making specific references to their religious beliefs. So I would say one solution could be you be subversive. You basically put your positive energy, whatever your mission you feel is, to share it with the world. Why not go into this industry with your positive message, with your message of hope or of change or whatever you want to do? And it's not just for Christian music, for whatever it is. Maybe you have to play by the rules. You have to strip out the sort of specific references. Okay, sure, no big deal. I know, you could say this to yourself. I know in my heart what I'm really trying to say. I know what this message really is, because you could have a song that if you stripped out those specific references, they're very licensable, actually. Optimism, finding joy, finding a new hope, discovering yourself, discovering your purpose in life, discovering, all these kind of things that are all very Christian in nature, but just without those specific references, it's still a positive thing that's going out there in the world. So you obviously, as we said in the beginning of this chat, and we'll finish it here, you got to decide where your own line is, what you feel comfortable doing or not doing. But at least you've now watched this chat and you've been aware of these kind of issues, so that as you move forward into your licensing career, you can make informed decisions on what you're really doing. And so you're not surprised down the road when you find that your tracks have been used for certain TV shows. You're like, what? I thought I had all the control. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So at least just know, the game that you're getting involved in before you get there.
Jesse, question real quick about that last point that you'd said about switching out some lyrics and stuff. In your experience, do you think that it could potentially be a strategy to create secular alternative mixers? For, let's say, a Christian artist or a Christian producer, right? They do Christian music, let everybody know, hey, look, this is what I do, this is what I believe in, but here's a version as an alternate mix that's a secular version. That might be, not to be, and I'm apologizing if I insult anybody, but a lot of times you can change the word God to baby, and then all of a sudden you got a pop tune,
Absolutely. I know
there's a whole South Park episode based on it.
Yeah, I think there was, absolutely. No, because I remember growing up and listening to a lot of bands, and a lot of Christian bands too, and a lot of them, they would start off as for lack of a better word, explicitly Christian, because they'd be talking about Jesus and God. They'd have these references, but the second or third album, they kind of drop all the specific references, but the message was still the same. And I think they were taking that approach to go we are going to try to reach more people in the world, and not just be preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? That's kind of what they're doing when they're just talking to other Christians. It's we want to kind of go out into the world and share this message. So it's a strategy. It's not right or wrong, and every musician or producer can decide that for themselves. And so I think go for it. If you feel like it's something that, as long as you're not feeling like you're compromising your ethics, right? You're not compromising your beliefs. You don't feel like you're selling out or doing something like that. If you feel it's no, this is a way for me to get what I want to get, and I'm just going to basically play this little game to get to that result, play the game, and just be aware of that's what you're doing. So yeah, it's totally up to any artist. It's not a bad idea if they feel that it's something that's
Yeah, ahead, I know authors do this. A lot of authors, especially in the past, used to do this, where they would kind of veil their Christian message with whatever the story was. Tolkien is pretty famous for this, and the Golden Compass. I don't remember the author for that, but there's that one, and there's a lot of other really, really famous literature that had the author on purpose kind of put a biblical underscore underneath it, but then topped it with magic and stuff, and that's a tactic, which is, they found it useful in what they were doing, and I don't see why you couldn't do that in your music as well.
Absolutely. It's just a strategy. So thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts today. And thanks to all of you that tuned in. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have further concerns, questions, comments about ethics or anything about that, please do comment below if you're on YouTube, or send me an email, jesse@syncmymusic.com. We can have follow-up chats on this if you guys have further concerns. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.